quite a number of people in Korea are seeking to delve into the beauty of books in their physical form and the pleasure of reading, as Korean literature was awarded a round of applause by this year's Nobel Committee. We have more on this edition of Press Perspective. Hello and welcome to yet another edition of Press Perspective. It's Friday, November 1st here in South Korea. I'm Min Sunhee. Today, our panel of press members touch upon a growing trend here in the country triggered by author Han Kang's Nobel accolade. For this, I have broadcaster Colin Marshall, who's also a writer, here in the studio. Colin, it's a pleasure to have you here.
The pleasure's all mine. Thank you.
I also have Chloe Borgnon, a correspondent for French network France 24. Chloe, it's great to have you back.
Hello, thank you for having me.
Right, Colin, do you suppose Han Kang's winning of the Nobel Prize for Literature this year has perhaps boosted a greater interest in Korean books and reading as a whole, based on your observations?
It couldn't hurt. It feels so similar to the time 8 years ago when she won the Booker International Prize, or she and her translator, Deborah Smith, together for The Vegetarian, won that prize in 2016, I believe it was. And then you could feel, oh, the status of Korean literature is about to rise in the world. And so it did. And I think if we can say there's been a boom, it's been ongoing. The popularity of Korean literature hasn't really dropped off globally since then. I think it's grown gradually, but with the Nobel Prize, of course, there's always a boom in interest of the works by the recipient, both in their home country and in the rest of the world. And sometimes, in the case of some Nobel laureates, that boom lasts a long time. In the case of some others, it lasts less long, but I think Han Kang she already had momentum. People in Korea, of course, didn't just hear of her. The Booker Prize made a lot of Koreans aware of her, as did it made a lot of international readers aware too. So I think she has a pretty solid base to work with, and she's young by the standards of the standards of international prize winners, especially Nobel Prize winners. She's 54. She could have 20 good years of books ahead of her. So I think I would bet on her popularity lasting, and that bleeding over to some extent to other Korean writers. But it remains to be seen. It's very early to tell.
Right, for sure. This is an impromptu question, Colin, but based on your reading of Han Kang's works, what do you suppose makes her writing so globally critically acclaimed, if you will?
It's a good question, and I think it's not enough to write a good book to win prizes like this, or to write good books. You also have to write books that tap into the zeitgeist, shall we say, or the interest that a literary prize jury would have. This is a writer who is a woman, but not just is a woman, writes from a female perspective. Most readers are women of fiction, let's be honest, especially in the US where I'm from. But she writes about how her characters, usually women, live in a way that pushes back against oppressive societies, for example, or find their own interiority when that can come under a challenge in many different ways, socially, economically, or even sort of under the waves of history, as you can see in some of her books that deal more directly with the events of Korean history. So I think that kind of thing, that definitely appeals to literary judges these days. And so, yes, it's important to write good books, but also to bear in mind who's reading them, who's judging them, and whose interests you're trying to sort of stoke, shall we say.
Right. Chloe, France itself, it boasts, I understand, the biggest number of Nobel laureates in literature, a total of 16 out of 121. That being said, how does the interest in books and reading and perhaps also writing in France compare to that here in Korea, do you think?
So if you like, we can talk about figures and compare them a little bit. So taking the year of reference 2023, we have studies done here by the Ministry of Culture for South Korea and by the Book National Center for France. So that's like National Institute. So how many percentage of the population consider themselves as readers, so I've read at least one book a year. It's 43% of the population here in South Korea. It's 89% of French people, so 9 French people out of 10 read at least one book for the year. Then the average number of books read per year, it's 3.9 books here in Korea, nearly 4 books, while it's 22 books in French. So we have to kind of see that because France is also counting the comics scene, while South Korea does not, and doesn't include comics or webtoons. So obviously, French people are maybe reading more books, but they're also reading more short stories. So maybe this comparison cannot really work. Then big question is why? Why are South Koreans reading less? So the main reason that are given is, first one is no time because of work. So working too much, you get home, you don't have time to read. The second thing is there is no habits of reading, so you don't think about taking a book when you're bored or doing something else. And the third one that links with it is there's more of a habit of taking your phone or going on the computer. So reading is kind of set aside. While in France, there is something about the perception on reading that is very positive. As you said, so a lot of Nobel Prize winners, but also a lot of classics that have been studied in school, etc. So the thing is, French people see that as reading is kind of improving knowledge, it's opening the mind, it's having a good time. But yet we can still see that there's something like in French medias, even if 9 out of 10 people are reading a book, they are still alarmed and stressed that people are not reading enough and that young people are not reading. So that's interesting to see that even in France, they're scared that people are dropping readings.
Right, although the average French person is reading 22 books a year, you said.
Exactly.
Right. Yeah. Colin, a recent article by The Guardian highlights a new trend among the Gen Z, whose members appear to believe, and I'm quoting, reading is sexy. How do you explain this phenomenon?
Yes, I remember that article from earlier this year. It's, of course, sexiness is in the eye of the beholder, but I think a lot of the phenomenon that article was discussing had to do with how books come off on social media, because, of course, that's the main way young people communicate. It's how they learn what's cool or what's sexy or what's new. And books, physical books, they play well on social media, I suspect. You know, if you have I've seen so many photos on social media of here's the stack of books I bought. Whether they read them or not, who can say? Or, you know, TikTok videos of short 2-minute book reviews, that kind of thing. Even on YouTube, there's a lot of book-related content. Even in Korea as well, I'm not just talking about the West. And I think, yes, there's that social media element, but also the fact that it's physical media they're talking about. They're not typically talking about ebooks. You can read a book on your phone. People do. You see it on the train here in Seoul as well. But physical books, they're sort of retro to young people. If we think of what's Gen Z, I don't know. They were born early in the 21st century, probably. They have never had to use that many physical books, just like they've never had to listen to that many physical CDs or vinyl LPs, right? So these things are cool because they're in the past. This is their first experience of them in a way. It's like the whole neutro phenomenon here in Korea. Like these generations who never experienced a lot of these old things, well, now they're cool to them because they're, in a way, new. Like books are sort of new to young people. It's hard to explain, but I think that's part of it. There's a novelty factor. And you know, you can be seen with a book. A book has a cover. If you're on the subway reading a book, you stand out in a way that somebody looking at their phone doesn't. I mean, I've done both on the train. I think a lot of us have, but there's a way to signal that you're in the know. Like the recent, the 2022 Nobel Prize winner, Annie Ernaux from France. You know, her books have been cool to read in the US or in the UK. And even here, she's still talked about a couple of years after her win. So there is a signaling value there too, some cultural cachet to reading a book that young people are discovering for the first time. And that surprises people who are sort of my age, who grew up with, you know, TV and the internet, but books were sort of something for a lot of us we were expected to read but didn't always want to.
Right, and speaking about young people, Chloe, quite a number of them, they're flocking over to Han Kang's bookstore. Now, she owns a small bookstore. She has owned it for the past 6 years, and it's been gathering huge crowds, especially following her win of this year's Nobel. Now, some people claim that this interest in Han Kang's work may perhaps also serve to boost tourism. What are your thoughts with regard to the ripple effects of a Nobel Prize?
So I think that in those ripple effects, the first one would be to promote, as you said, Korean literature here in Korea. We've seen that with the sale of exploding for the books of Han Kang. There's also when you go to Seoul Central Library, they put a huge banner on the facade saying something along we hope that this Nobel Prize from Han Kang will promote and will push people to read more. Again, we're coming back to the 4 books read per year. So that's interesting to see that it was the first thing that was done by the Seoul Central Library, just to say, please read more, thanks to Han Kang. The second thing I would say would be to promote Korean literature outside. Once again, if I come back to this same Seoul Central Library, they've been doing the outdoor library event for quite some time. And so in October, following the Nobel Prize, they put out a little, like a table with all the books, translated Korean books that they have. So it would be in French, in Russian, in Arabic, in English. And it was interesting to see because I have been in that library and it is hard to find those books in normal time. Like I've been searching for them quite a long time. So it was interesting to see them like as a master, like centerpiece, and asking people, tourists especially, to come and have a look at the literature that you can find translated here. And it's true that this translation, like this efforts in translation, we are already seeing that the Ministry of Culture is going to promote that. They are going to, in the budget for next year, they have already said that part of the budget will be put for the Literature and Translation Institute for translation and promotion of the book. And I feel like it is important to do it because if we come back to Han Kang, The Vegetarian, for example, was written in 2006, was translated in English in 2015, and then he won the Man Booker Prize. And same thing with the latest one, So We Do Not Part, written in 2021, translated in French in 2023. She won immediately the Médicis Étranger Prize, so one of the big prizes in France. And it's yet to be published in English, so I know the US version will be out in January next year. So, I mean, there is like promotion to do and there is speed and efforts to do for translating those books and to release them for the public. Because, as you said, it will probably have an effect on tourism because if you read about a country and if you read contemporary books, obviously it makes you want to come and want to discover, just like K-dramas. K-literature will probably have an effect as well.
Right, even K-pop. I remember Psy's Gangnam Style had all my friends abroad asking me where Gangnam was. So, Colin, Han Kang's quaint bookstore, it's reignited public interest in small neighborhood stores. Have you been to a small neighborhood bookstore?
A few hundred, I'm sure. I was actually yesterday at Han Kang's bookstore. It's closed right now, I think due to all the people who would be flooding it. So I know she runs it with her son, and she's not the most publicity-seeking writer in the world, ironically, given the amount of attention she's receiving. So the bookstore's closed for now, but there's still people coming up taking photos. I was taking a photo too. Yes, the bookstores, the neighborhood bookstores of Korea, the 책방, which is a word that's difficult to translate into English. We don't really have 책방 in the US. We have bookstores, we have 서점. 책방 is a different thing. They're one of the first elements of Seoul that really drew me to want to live here. Of course, the kind of cafes and things like that too, but 책방, these neighborhood bookstores with personality, and they're sort of well curated or curated clearly by an individual or by a small number of people. And the mood, the 분위기 is always good, you know. They're fun to visit. And the US has small bookstores, just not so many, like not as many as Seoul. And I think even outside Seoul, like this is impressive. I've been traveling with my parents here in Korea a lot these past couple weeks. They're visiting. And you find these small bookstores. We were on Jeju Island. There were bookstores that were sort of so distinctive and they had personality and like, they wouldn't exist elsewhere, you know. You can find them everywhere in Korea, and that's really, it's an underappreciated quality of Korea because, alas, many visitors to Korea haven't really studied enough Korean to read books in Korean, but I think that's a good reason to learn Korean, is because you can then appreciate the bookstores. For me, that was a big reason anyway.
Do you suppose more should be done, Colin, to keep these bookstores alive? Quite a number of them are suffering from like very low profits.
Right, this is universal. You know, bookstores don't make much money. So I think rather than directly supporting bookstores, say through government policy, what might be best is making sure that Seoul, for example, is a city where such bookstores, such businesses can be run. It's all downstream of affordability. So you've got to have a lot of retail space. You've got to have a lot of usable space in general. So it's about, you know, building a lot of space, but also not demolishing that much space. A lot of these bookstores, you know, you might think of your favorite ones, they're not in new buildings. They're in old buildings, not necessarily in desirable locations. Like Tongidong, where Han Kang's bookstore is very fashionable, but they're not new buildings, not big complexes. They're usually old buildings repurposed. And so I think if we can hold on to some of the, how to put it, the not necessarily cutting-edge building stock and let that be used for businesses like neighborhood bookstores. That's a good strategy, rather than just sort of propping up bookstores directly.
Right, for sure. Chloe, news of Han Kang's winning of the Nobel Prize, actually, like you mentioned earlier, boosted sales of Han Kang's books at very, very big bookstores. But the smaller ones did not see as much profits because most people were flocking to these mega stores, prompting one such store to briefly stop sales of her books, encouraging members of the public to reach out to their neighborhood stores first. What are your thoughts regarding such efforts?
Well, to be honest, I was impressed in a very good way. Like, it's always good to see that you have bookstores that remember that, yeah, as you were saying, that it's important to keep the small ones with more like spirit and more livelihood alive. I would say it's, to make a comparison with France, during COVID-19, there was a time during the pandemics when every shop that was non-essential had to close. And the thing is, small neighborhood bookshops, they couldn't deliver the books, while the big bookshops that had website were able to do so. And there in France, there was no like same way of being nice, and no, so the smaller bookshops, I had to find a way to still deliver. I remember I was living in Paris at the time. The bookshop close to me, they made like advertisement saying, if you come, like if you order your book from our website or through an email, you can come pick it up with a no contact pickup. And they had to kind of find new ways to do it because they were not selling anymore. The thing is, the big difference is also that in France there is this thing with the price of the books is the same everywhere. So you don't have the right to sell them at a different price. So there is probably less interest in going in a big bookstore because you will not get any like bigger like change of prices. But yeah, I think it's important to keep smaller bookstores and to keep them alive everywhere.
Right, as Colin was saying. Moving forward, Chloe, a number of European media outlets have been covering the popularity of Hallyu, which now includes its books. How do you explain this growing global popularity?
So I would say that Hallyu is gaining Europe. It's been very strong in Asia, very strong in Oceania. I would say Europe has been, it's been a few years now, but it's still growing a lot. And you have countries like, I know that Spain, France are some of the biggest consumers, but it's starting to globally go into Europe market, and it's probably why we as European journalists are interested in it. So the main reason why we are seeing this growing phenomenon, there are a few of them, but first thing would be, I would say, the communities. So a bit like with the books for the younger generation, you have all the social media, so TikTok, you have Instagram, everything. And I did a report on K-beauty, and same, I was speaking about K-beauty on the Hallyu side and how it was attracting foreigners. And one French girl who is here, actually influencer, she told me that as soon as she's speaking about Korea and about K-beauty, her like videos are doing so much better than everything else, like 4 times better than all her other videos. And she was really saying that you have keywords, and Korea is one of the main keywords to attract people. So through that, you're making advertisement about the country, and Hallyu is growing. There is also the fact that you have new platforms. So before, like in France, for example, without the big platform, you wouldn't get K-drama, you wouldn't get webtoon, which is, you know, a shame because, for example, France is really into comics, is really into manga. So obviously, now that the webtoons are coming, they know that they will have the audience because people are ready to read that kind of books. So this is the kind of things, and also the fact that, as you were saying, the K-wave is expanding. So it used to be music, and then it was film, drama, and now it's also food, cosmetic, books. So, you know, the more you include stuff, the more you have chance to find attraction with the foreign audience.
Right. I think it's a great time to be Korean. I mean, I remember back in the 70s when I was abroad and I was trying to explain to people that I was from Korea. They weren't sure where Korea was.
Yes.
But right now, if you say Korea, straight away you get BTS and Squid Game, etc. Colin, how do you explain the popularity of Hallyu these years?
Oh boy, Hallyu. I think Korean popular culture, whether it be the music or the music videos or the TV dramas or the films, which kind of got me on board initially, they have a vitality that is missing in a lot of popular culture in Western countries. And that's tied in with something I'm often asked about, because I wrote a book here in Korea earlier this year with a section about irony and how Korean culture is not that ironic if you compare it to the US or the UK or even France. And it's, you know, in America, a lot of popular culture, whether it be music, movies, TV, whatever, there's always this sort of element like it's winking at you, like, you know, don't take it too seriously, it's all a joke, it's kind of a game. Korean popular culture is not like that. It's almost serious, like it's serious pop culture, it's seriously effortful, and the literature is even more so. And Han Kang is not an ironic writer by any stretch of the imagination. She may be too serious for some readers, but you can't accuse her of being frivolous, and you can't accuse her of sort of taking things lightly. Like, she's really engaged in her enterprise, just like BTS is in theirs, or, you know, even like Psy. He seems like a jokester, but he's doing his thing seriously. And I think that's something Westerners often feel on some level they're missing in their own popular culture. Like, that's just that 열정, you know?
That passion that you need to have.
Yes, indeed.
Right. Chloe, the Frankfurt Book Fair took place, I believe, last month, and media reports touch upon the crowds that the Korean stand was also gathering. That being said, what are your thoughts regarding Korean literature among global readers going forward?
I think it's a really great thing. Like, unlike Colin, I'm unable to read serious book in Korean for now, so you can stop at kid books, but it's, you know, so I see all those great books. I go to bookstores and I see all those great books that are yet to be translated. And I feel like, you know, the more development in the translation work, the better perspective we will get on Korean literature. I also feel that in the past years, it's already been getting better. So taking my point of view, because I was still in France at the time, but in France you would not see a lot of Korean books. You will see Sang, for example, you know, like older books, but then, you know, there's development of new fields. For example, I don't know, Chung Bora, I learned about her like not long ago, but I know...
The Cursed Bunny.
Yeah, Cursed Bunny is the one who's been translated, but I know there's a lot of others who are on the line getting translated. So it's kind of horror, feminism works as well. And I feel it's interesting because Korean, as they have a very specific way to write and they have a specific voice, and it's interesting to get to learn about them.
Right. Well, I'm afraid that's all the time we have for this edition. Chloe, as always, thank you so much for your time and your thoughts. And Colin, thank you very much for your insights.
Thank you.
For those of you who have yet to make plans for this weekend, reading a book may be one option. That brings us to the end of this week's editions of Press Perspective. Have a great weekend.